Water didn't come from canals, pumps, or pipes. It didn't need to be carried, stored, or rationed. It arrived on its own, spread across the land, and quietly transformed dry soil into one of the most fertile growing environments on Earth. Then, just as naturally, it disappeared, leaving behind everything crops needed to thrive. This wasn't luck. It was a system. Across vast river valleys, long before modern irrigation systems existed, farming followed a rhythm dictated entirely by nature. Rivers would swell with seasonal rains, spill over their banks, and flood the surrounding plains. At first glance, this might seem destructive, even chaotic. But beneath that surface was something remarkably precise. As the floodwaters spread out, they slowed down. And as they slowed, they began to drop what they carried. Fine particles of silt, rich in nutrients, built up from miles upstream. Layer by layer, year after year, this process created soil that was naturally fertilized without any human intervention. Then the water receded. Not all at once, not abruptly, but gradually, soaking into the ground as it went. What remained wasn't just wet soil. It was deeply saturated land, holding moisture well below the surface. That moisture didn't vanish quickly. It stayed, locked into the earth, available to plants for weeks or even months. This is where the real ingenuity appeared. Instead of trying to control the water, farmers timed their entire agricultural cycle around it. Crops were planted after the floodwaters pulled back, right when the soil was at its most fertile and moisture-rich state. There was no need to dig irrigation channels or haul water across fields. The land had already been prepared, watered, and fertilized, all in one natural event. Seeds went into the ground, and growth followed without any manual watering. This approach wasn't limited to one place or culture. It showed up wherever rivers behaved this way, carving out floodplains and renewing the land with each seasonal rise. Along the Nile, this pattern defined agriculture for thousands of years. The river's annual flood wasn't feared. It was expected, even welcomed. It determined planting seasons, harvest cycles, and ultimately the stability of entire civilizations. The same principle appeared along the Niger River, where flood recession farming still exists today. Communities there continue to rely on the natural rise and fall of water levels, planting crops in the moist soil left behind. No pumps, no irrigation infrastructure, just timing, observation, and trust in the cycle. What makes this system so effective isn't just the water. It's how everything works together at once. The flood doesn't just hydrate the soil, it feeds it. That layer of silt acts like a natural fertilizer, replenishing nutrients that crops remove during growth. In modern farming, those nutrients are often replaced with synthetic inputs. Here, the river does the job for free. And because the water seeps deep into the ground, plants don't depend on frequent surface watering. Their roots grow downward, tapping into moisture reserves stored beneath. This creates crops that are not only sustained naturally, but are often more resilient. There's also something else happening that isn't immediately obvious. Because this system doesn't rely on constant human intervention, it reduces labor dramatically. There's no need to monitor irrigation schedules, repair systems, or manage water distribution. The most important task becomes timing, knowing when the flood will recede and when the soil is ready. It's a different way of thinking about farming entirely. Instead of forcing the environment to adapt to agriculture, agriculture adapts to the environment. That shift changes everything. Modern systems often aim for control, controlling water flow, soil conditions, nutrient levels. But this older approach leans into variability. It accepts that rivers will rise and fall, that seasons will change, and that these changes can be used rather than resisted. And yet, despite how efficient and sustainable this method is, it's often overlooked. Part of that comes down to predictability. Flood-based systems depend on natural cycles, which can vary from year to year. Too much flooding can damage crops if timing is off. Too little flooding can reduce soil moisture and nutrient deposits. It's a system that requires understanding and patience, not just infrastructure. Another reason is the way modern agriculture has evolved. with the introduction of dams, reservoirs, and controlled irrigation networks, many rivers no longer flood the way they used to. The natural rhythms that once supported floodplain farming have been altered, sometimes completely disrupted. When a river is controlled, its floodplain often stops receiving the very thing that made it fertile in the first place. That creates a dependency. Without floods, farmers must replace what's missing: water through irrigation, nutrients through fertilizers. What was once a self-sustaining system becomes one that requires constant input. This contrast highlights something important. Floodplain farming isn't just an old method, it's a different philosophy, one that works with natural processes instead of replacing them. And even today, in places where rivers still follow their natural course, this method continues to prove its value. Fields that receive seasonal floods often produce crops with minimal external input. The soil remains fertile year after year, not because it's managed intensively, but because it's renewed naturally. There's also an environmental dimension to this that's hard to ignore. Without the need for pumps or irrigation systems, energy use drops significantly. Without synthetic fertilizers, the risk of chemical runoff decreases. And because the soil structure is maintained naturally, it's less prone to degradation over time. In a world where agriculture is often resource-intensive, this stands out. But it also raises a question that doesn't need to be asked directly to be felt. If such a system can work so effectively with so little intervention, why did it become less common? The answer isn't simple, but part of it lies in scale and control. It's a quiet advantage, but a powerful one. In regions where this method is still practiced, the rhythm of farming follows the river almost like a calendar. The rising water signals preparation. The peak of the flood marks a pause, and the retreat of the water becomes the starting point for planting. There's no need for guesswork about irrigation schedules or water allocation. The environment itself provides the timing. Along parts of the Niger River, for example, communities continue to rely on this cycle. As the floodwaters recede, farmers move in, planting crops like sorghum, millet, and vegetables directly into the moist soil. The land, still rich with nutrients and holding deep reserves of water, supports growth without additional input. This isn't experimental or theoretical, it's practical, ongoing, and proven. And it highlights something that often gets overlooked in conversations about agricultural innovation. Not every solution requires new technology. Sometimes it involves rediscovering systems that already solved the problem in a different way. Of course, this doesn't mean floodplain farming is without its challenges. Because it depends on natural flooding patterns, it's closely tied to the behavior of rivers. When those patterns change, the system feels it immediately. Too much flooding at the wrong time can delay planting or damage young crops. Too little flooding can reduce both soil moisture and nutrient replenishment. In recent decades, another factor has added complexity: river management. Dams, levees, and reservoirs have altered the flow of many major rivers. While these structures provide benefits like hydroelectric power and flood control, they often reduce or eliminate the natural flooding that floodplain farming depends on. When a river no longer spills over its banks, the floodplain loses its defining feature. Without that annual renewal, the soil gradually changes. Nutrient levels drop, moisture retention decreases, and farmers are often forced to adopt more conventional irrigation and fertilization methods. What was once a self-sustaining system becomes dependent on external inputs. This shift isn't just technical, it's structural. It changes how land is used, how resources are allocated, and how farming is practiced on a fundamental level. And once that transition happens, returning to a flood-based system isn't always straightforward, especially if the river's natural behavior has been permanently altered. Still, in places where the natural cycle remains intact, the method continues to stand out as remarkably efficient. There's no energy cost for water delivery, no infrastructure to maintain, no need for synthetic fertilizers to compensate for nutrient loss. The river handles all of it in a single coordinated process. And that simplicity carries a kind of elegance. It's not about minimizing effort entirely. There's still work involved in planting, managing, and harvesting crops. but it removes one of the most resource-intensive parts of farming: irrigation. In a time when water scarcity is becoming a growing concern in many parts of the world, that detail matters. Agriculture accounts for a significant portion of global water use, much of it tied to irrigation. Systems that can reduce or eliminate that need without sacrificing productivity offer a different way of thinking about resource management. Floodplain farming doesn't just reduce water use. It reframes the role of water entirely. Instead of being something that must be extracted, transported, and applied, water becomes part of a larger cycle that prepares the land in advance. It arrives, does its work, and leaves behind conditions that support growth long after it's gone. That idea connects closely with broader approaches like regenerative agriculture, which focus on working with natural processes rather than overriding them. While the contexts are different, the underlying principle is similar: build systems that sustain themselves as much as possible. And that's exactly what floodplain farming achieves. It turns a seasonal event into a complete agricultural solution. Water, nutrients, soil preparation, all handled in a single phase, without manual intervention. The result is a method that feels almost counterintuitive in a modern context. So much of today's agriculture is built on increasing inputs to maximize outputs. More water, more fertilizer, more control. But here, the opposite is true. Less intervention, not more, is what makes it work. And that's where the real takeaway begins to take shape. Because this isn't just about a specific technique tied to certain rivers or regions. It's about a way of thinking that can influence how agricultural systems are designed moving forward. Not every place has access to floodplains or seasonal river cycles. But the principle of aligning with natural processes rather than replacing them can still apply in different forms. Whether it's capturing rainwater more effectively, improving soil moisture retention, or reducing dependency on constant irrigation, the idea carries forward. It suggests that efficiency doesn't always come from adding complexity. Sometimes it comes from removing it. By allowing natural systems to do what they've always done, and designing around that instead of against it, entirely new possibilities open up. Systems that are less resource-intensive, more resilient, and often more sustainable over time. And all of that starts with something as simple as a river overflowing its banks. What might look like a disruption at first glance turns out to be the foundation of a highly efficient agricultural cycle. One that doesn't require constant oversight or intervention, but instead unfolds with a kind of quiet precision. It's not flashy. It doesn't rely on advanced machinery or complex networks. But it works, and it has worked for a very long time. As agriculture continues to evolve, especially under the pressure of changing climates and growing populations, methods like this offer something valuable. Not necessarily as a direct replacement for modern systems, but as a reminder. A reminder that some of the most effective solutions don't come from building more, but from understanding more. Understanding how water moves, how soil responds, and how timing can replace effort when it's used correctly. Because in the end, the ingenuity of floodplain farming isn't just in what it does, it's in what it doesn't need. No irrigation systems, no constant input, no unnecessary complexity. Just a cycle that, once understood, takes care of itself. And that's what makes it so powerful. If this kind of hidden, nature-driven innovation is something worth exploring further, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and stay tuned for more stories that uncover how simple ideas have shaped entire civilizations.